Okay, so we're going to start with part two, scene two, which begins about 8 in the evening. So even in the temporal setting of this scene, there's the suggestion of the move into darkness that I think associate what goes on in the following action with a type of Dionysian passion. The scene starts with the interior of the two bedrooms on the top floor, with this contrast between Aben and Cabot and Abby. On account of the heat, he's taken off everything but his undershirt and pants. His feet are bare. He faces front, brooding moodily. His chin propped in his hands, a desperate expression on his face. So there's this enormous sense, I think, of both bodily kind of sensuality and physical longing in the mise-en-scène and the stagecraft and the setting at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 2. Then in the other room, Cabot and Abby are sitting side by side, and Cabot is still in the queer, excited mood into which the notion of a sun has thrown him, but rooms are lighted dimly and flickeringly by tallow candles. So there's, again, a physical embodiment of Oedipal rivalry in the setting, but importantly, also what O'Neill is doing is juxtaposing the kind of passion and authentic vitality of the connection between Aben and Abby with the sort of stultified, false connection between Abby and Ephraim. So the setting itself is creating this type of dramatic irony. So the setting is creating the dramatic irony, which undermines Ephraim. All of this setting is designed really to show us Ephraim's lack of awareness and that tragic hamartia, the fact that he has no idea about his own absence of vital connection, and then can't see the vital connection between his own wife and son that's going on around him. So they open, the farm needs a son and I need a son, and they're both lying here. The farm doesn't really need a son in Ephraim's eyes. There's a sense of egotistical desire for sort of patrilineal inheritance that motivates this. But here he's sort of false evading his egotism, and she's evading her greed, which I think feeds into this idea that they are in some way contrasted here and inauthentic and distant. He says this further: sometimes you're the farm and sometimes the farm be you. That's why I clove to you in my lonesomeness. So here, there's this interesting concept that in his mind, Abby and the farm are interwoven. And this shows us, I think, the way his vision is manipulated by his ego. That he explains actually that he only clings to her in his lonesomeness because he identifies her with an extension of himself, with his farm, with his possessions. She's talking to him as if he's talking gibberish. You're getting things all messed up. And he's impatient here. No, I ain't. My mind's clear as well. You don't know me, that's it. And he stares hopelessly at the floor. So this is his isolation. What we see in this scene is the product, the end result of all of his restrictive Apollonian lifestyle. This is what ultimately this results in, is his isolation from those around him. She's indifferent to him here. And then her eyes fasten on the intervening wall with concentration. With concentrated attention, Aben stops and stares. Their hot glances seem to meet through the wall. So again, that sort of passionate fatalism is created through O'Neill's stagecraft. And unconsciously, he stretches out his arms for her, and she half rises. So there's this sense, the way that O'Neill is using his set here is to reveal that kind of fatalistic connection between the characters, to underline the fact that they aren't even fully aware of their own attraction to each other. He mutters a curse to himself, flings himself face downward on the bed, his clenched fist above his head, his face buried in the pillow. So he has this kind of uncontrollable internal conflict here where he is experiencing this intense, sort of passionate physical desire for Abby and then hating himself for doing that. She listens with all her attention for some movement of Aben. So she, the way that she described his sort of animalizes her alertness, makes it seem impulsive, makes it seem like they're being driven together through this kind of fatalistic connection. Cabot, though, in contrast, here says, "Will you ever know me? Or will any man or woman? No, I calculated 'twont to be." We see here that his Apollonian sort of egoistic isolation has contrasted with a sort of powerful Dionysian passion that is driving Abby and Aben together that we're seeing in the scene. So there's It's a masterful use of stagecraft to reveal that fatalistic compulsion that defines the two protagonists in opposition to the antagonist. So here, he turns away and Abi looks at the wall, then evidently unable to keep silent about his thoughts. Without looking at his wife, he puts out his hand and clutches her knee. She starts violently, looks at him, sees he's not watching her, concentrates again on the wall and pays no attention to what he says. So we have this important representation of physical contact, which is such a huge element of the way that Abi and Aben are described together. But here it's emptied of its vital or animating passion because it's forced and it's based on a connection that is inauthentic. This is a real important moment for a friend because this is the closest thing that he comes to a really kind of intense, subjective kind of confession. He talks about his life. When I come here 50 odd years ago, I was just 20 and the strongest and hardest you'd ever seen. 10 times as strong, 50 times as hard as Aben. So again, there's a huge sense of irony here because he exacerbates the distance. But, well, he underlines his qualities that have actually driven her away from him, this hardness, and that have attracted her to Aben. So the irony that goes on here is that he is actually underlining aspects of Aben's personality that Abi finds compelling in some way, even though he thinks he's competing with him and winning. He says here, when you can make corn sprout out of stones, God's living in you. And this is the mode of thinking that O'Neill is so keen to criticise. That this deliberate asceticism, asceticism, the self-abnegation and denial and suffering is in some way divine and holy. Well, O'Neill seems to be saying not. O'Neill seems to be saying, well, actually, you're denying a vital element of your humanity if you live in adherence to this self-abnegation. He talks about others that went off to the west, and he says they're all underground for following after an easy God. So here, they're all under the ground, all these people that supposedly tried to go and make their money, but his life is a form of death. He's a sort of life in death human being because of his rigid Apollonian commitments. And then he knows this, and I growed hard. Folk kept always saying he's a hard man, like it was sinful to be hard. And so this is describing his sort of process of ossification. I mean, sort of turning into a bone. But that's ultimately what he seems to be doing in a kind of metaphorical sense. He doesn't understand this, and this is where we see, I think, his hamasha, his tragic, fatal lack of self-understanding, his personal limitation that he doesn't get. He talks here about the stones, and he talks here quite poetically about the stones. We come to broad meadows, plains, what the soil was black and rich as gold, never a stone, easy. You don't need to plough and sow and then set and smoke your pipe and watch things grow. I could have been a rich man, but something is fitting me and fit me, the voice of God saying, this ain't worth nothing to me. Get you back to your home. So here he explicitly articulates his desire to live a kind of life of difficulty and suffering. And that's ultimately that frame of mind, that rigid, difficult, uncomfortable life is what he believes he needs to undergo as an experience. And then he says, I got afeard of that voice, and I fit out back to home here, leaving my claim and crops to whoever in mind to take them. So it's fear that motivates his isolation. He is afraid of that voice. He is afraid of his own vital passion, of his own emotions, of his own desires. He is afraid of them. And that fearfulness is what has led him down this path of isolation. And then he says here, I actually gave up what was rightful mine. But then he articulates this through a theological justification. God's hard, not easy. God's in the stones. Build my church on a rock out of stones and I'll be in them. This is an allusion to Matthew in the Bible, book 16, chapter 18, where he says here, Jesus replied, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And this is the biblical allusion that O'Neill is utilising here in order to show us the theological basis for Ephraim's Apollonian rigidity. I'll build my church on a rock out of stones and I'll be in them. That's what he meant to Peter. And so here's his biblical allusion, his theological justification for a life of self-abnegation that has only resulted in his isolation and loneliness. And it's not a coincidence that we see these lines, this theological rationale, in the scene where O'Neill is crafting the dramatic irony of his isolation and limitation. He says, you can read the years of my life in them walls, every day a hefted stone, climbing over the hills up and down, fencing in the fields that was mine, what I'd made things grow out of nothing, like the will of God, like the servant of his hand. It wasn't easy. It was hard. He made me hard for it. All the time I kept getting lonesomer. And so here is the conflation of his personal theology with the causes of his isolation. So he talks here about this philosophy, this ascetic philosophy of life, of self-abnegation, of deliberate difficulty. Every day was a hefted stone, and that metaphor, I think, speaks so clearly to Ephraim's state of mind and his character. Fencing in the fields that was mine, a metaphorical desire for control of everything that is under his sort of aegis, where I'd make things grow out of nothing, like the will of God. So he seems that by sheer force of will, he will experience divinity. But it was hard, and he made me hard for it. All the time I was getting lonesome. So this pause here is his hamasha. This is one of the most important moments for understanding his character. He misunderstands his personality. He understands his whole nature of his being as a quest for divinity through a life philosophy of denial and a sheer force of will, but can't see why it's making him lonely. So this is a symptom of his stoic philosophy of life. And this pause here is his hamasha. There's the moment. There's that kind of Pinterian moment where he should understand his limitations. He should say to himself, well, maybe there was something wrong with this whole philosophy of life. But no, he doesn't. He ignores it and then just sees it as the world's problem that he's lonely. Then he talks about his previous wife. She bore Simeon and Peter. She was a good woman. She worked hard. She was married 20 years. She never knowed me. And again, that lack of self-awareness. He doesn't think that there's anything that he could do to allow people to get to know him, to connect with others. His isolation is manifested itself in his first marriage, his first relationship. And then here, this is developed. She died. After that, it wasn't so lonesome for a spell. So his relationship actually exacerbated his sense of loneliness because it, I think, draws attention to his own separation as an individual. Then he talks about the farm growing. It was all mine. When I thought of that, I didn't feel lonesome. And there is his mistake. Taking possession of the farm is what seemed to be overcoming my lonesomeness. And there is that pause. Here is his hamasha, misattributing his possessive, egoistical desire for control with a sense of human connection that's completely missing. Then he moves on to talking about Abin's ma. She tried to be hard, she couldn't, she never knowed me nor nothing. It was lonesomer in hell with her. So actually with someone who is like Abin, this sort of vital, animated, passionate sort of sexual being, he feels even more lonesome because the connection that she seems, I think, capable of invoking is something that he feels like a kind of alien in relation to. He has no way of accustomizing himself to that. They coveted the farm without knowing what it meant. It made me bitter as wormwood. It aged me, them coveting what I'd made for mine. Then the spring, the cool calm, the voice of God crying in my wilderness, in my lonesomeness, to go out and seek and find. And so here, this is this Dionysian prompting that has driven him, and I think is deliberately suggested in the way that his eyes twinkle, and he seems like this kind of crafty, animalized being when he returns back with Abby. He is being prompted by the Dionysian, being prompted by natural vitality, by passion. And he semi-understands it. He's sort of quasi-understanding here on his face. And he's compelled by a desire for connection. Here it is. Here is that moment that he's missing that would solve this hamasha, this lack of understanding of isolation, of his own flaws. He says, you and my Rosa Sharon, your eyes are alike, and she has turned a blank face, resentful eyes to his. She stares at He stares at her for a moment, then harshly, "Are you any wiser for all I've told you?" Confused, maybe. So here, this is a moment, I think, of rare sort of empathy for him. He is experiencing the thing that would make him a fully reconciled individual, but because of his identity and the way that Abby is being compelled towards someone else, she's completely disconnected from him. She's longing for connection with Aben rather than him. And then he pushes her away from him angrily. "You don't know nothing, nor never will, if you don't have a son to redeem you." And this is in a cold tone of threat. And so she hasn't connected through his sort of confessional anecdote. She hasn't, and he knows this, and he now sees their relationship again purely as a need to create a son who he can establish this connection with. And she said resentfully, I pray again for understanding." And so here, his loneliness and his isolation is emphasized again, that he knows she does not connect with him and does not understand him. Here, there's a veiled threat in her tone. "You'll have a son out of me, I promise you." So we can see, I think, even from this moment, the beginning of her plotting of sexuality with Aben. Here, "I've got second son, maybe I can foretell." That was an important, I think, revelation that contrasts her with him. Remember, he's constantly, through the motif of sight, shown to be limited in his vision, limited in his understanding. And Abby, I think, is superior to him in her depth of understanding of human motivation. She knows that she is being driven by forces beyond her control and is kind of submitting to them. And that's where her second sight comes from. Cabot says, "I believe you have. You give me the chills sometimes." And he shivers. It's cold in this house. It's uneasy. Things poking about in the dark in the corners. So he's haunted, I think, by this vengeful presence of the elms, of the force, of the power of Ma. He understands that there is this presence in the house and that it threatens him. And he, at this point, I think has associated Abby with this in the same way that Aben does. So again, the similarities between him and Aben are accumulated at this point in time. She seems surprised and asks, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Down where it's restful, where it's warm, down to the barn. I could talk to the cows. They know the farm and me. They'll give me peace." So his compromised Dionysian connection with the cows is actually a symptom of his loneliness. He's attempted to reach out to Abby here and it hasn't happened. And that this is his only sort of outlet for that vital sense of emotional and physical connection. It's with animals, and it's a bastardized version of the Dionysian. O'Neill is not saying that he is getting the full experience, the full component, the full spectrum of human experience. He still isn't gaining that full kind of connection with something vital and transcendental. She asks him, "Are you ailing tonight, Ephraim?" And he says, "I'm growing ripe on the bough." So he awakes as he leaves. And at this moment in time, there's this sort of sense, I think, of mental degeneration, which is the consequence of his loneliness in his sort of nonsensical responses. Aben then sits up as he leaves. And so, as he's growing ripe on the bough, he seems vital as he moves down to the cows, as he gets away from humans. And then Aben sits up with a start. So he awakes. The entrance and exits here are really important. Aben here is sort of roused into consciousness, even though he's unaware of why. Abby's conscious of his movement and stares at the wall. Cabot comes out of the house. And so those entrances and exits, again, create that sense of Aben and Abby being compelled towards each other and Ephraim being ostracized by their connection. He's blinking at the sky as he leaves the house. So there's, again, this desire for the sort of reconciliation of these conflicted, competing impulses that he's seen in his own life. Stretches up his hands and then calls, "God Almighty, call from the dark." Again, here is his Samasha. He misappropriates his conflict. He sees God as the potential salvation here, and actually it would be to him to submit more deeply to a deep, intensive human passion. And he has tried, but he has failed because of his prior experiences. He listens as if expecting an answer, and I think there's a sense there of it being doomed to fail. Then his arms drop. He shakes his head and plods off towards the barn. He doesn't get what he's looking for from invoking the Almighty, because it's not the right thing. Aben and Abby stare at each other through the wall. So there is what he should be doing. The answer is in O'Neill's the setting and the stagecraft, the passionate connection that his son is having. So that intense fatalistic connection is what he should be seeking, but again, he seeks for the answers in theology and religion. Aben sighs heavily and Abby echoes it. Both become terribly nervous, uneasy. Finally, Abby gets up and listens with her ear to the wall. He acts as if he saw every move she was making. Again, they're fatalistically connected. He becomes resolutely still. She still seems driven into a decision. So again, she's not in control of what happens here. She stares at him through the wall here, her eyes burning with desire. So there's this huge sense of connection, even though they can't literally see each other. And that sight motif is really important here, that they have that deep second vision. They see their connection and the forces that drive their connection beyond the literal. When he does actually see her eyes burn with desire, and she runs over and throws her arms about his neck, pulls his head back and covers his mouth with kisses. A huge outburst of physical passion. And then he submits dumbly. Then he puts his arms about her neck and returns her kisses. But finally, suddenly aware of his hatred, he hurls her away from him. So there's a huge, sudden transformation of his feelings that shows us that enormous sense of personal conflict that he experiences. And at the end of this, they're panting like two animals. So we see that huge, impulsive, physical sexuality that is driving their connection together. And that, I think, invites that kind of comparison with the way sexuality is represented in Streetcars, this impulsive sort of animal force that we can't control. She helplessly said, "You do, Aben, you do. Why do you lie?" She needs him. You know, that previous power that she has over him is being lost here. She knows that she needs him. Further down, with an uncertain, troubled laugh, "Well, I kissed you anyways, and you kissed back. Your lips were burning. You can't lie about that." There is this huge sense of tension as an effect of his internal conflict, but she knows her power over him here. You know, she knows that there's this internal conflict in him, but she knows that physical passion that he has for her grants him a type of power over her. And that you can't lie about that intensely. I think the physicality is more truthful and trustworthy than their language again. You know, that their physicality in these above stage directions is more reflective of the authentic state of their relationship than what they're actually saying to each other. And so at the bottom, he says it was like poison on him. He's talking about his mouth. "When I kissed you back, maybe I thought it was someone else," and she's wild here. Min, this huge sense of jealous, passionate envy. And he says, "Maybe." And she's tortured by this, and we can see this. This is real feeling here, and this is a moment of great contrast. That there is this authentic passion in Abby here. She's tortured by these suggestions. Did you go to see him? Did you really go? So we have this huge sense of authentic feeling. And further down, when she's raging, she calls him a dog for going to see Min. She then has a shrill laugh because he says, "You can't talk to me that way." And she slips back into this false manipulation. "Did you think I was in love with you? A weak thing like you?" You know, we can see suddenly that she's already changing. She's already fabricating here. "I only wanted you for a purpose." But the irony of this is that is what Aben is still having conflicted feelings about. He believes that this is true, what she's saying. And so even though that this is Aben's belief, what she's actually saying here is untrue, and we can see that through the intensity of the stage directions above. He's then resentful because he feels like this is confirmed. "I knowed well it was only a part of your plan to swallow everything." This is what the kind of Ephraim component in him wants him to believe. You know, here is him becoming like his father. You know, he is believing that everything is explicable through materialism and greed and through rigid sort of egotism. But it's not. We know that it's not true because we can see that the forces of fate are driving these two characters together. And then here he becomes threatening. "Get out before I murder you." And she's quite confident now. "I ain't afraid. You want me. don't you? Yes, you do. So even though Aben is trying to sort of shoehorn her into this sort of materialistic vision, Abby has power over him. And I think this is completely derived from her consciousness of her sexuality, her sexual passion, and her being on the side of the forces of vitality and fate and sexuality and nature is what is driving them together. And she says, there's lust for me and I'm burning them up. And she knows that she's fully conscious that she has these forces on her side, which is a great deal like Stanley Kowalski, the socioeconomic forces of materialism in Streetcar. He's watching her now with a horrible fascination. She laughs a crazy, triumphant laugh. So he can't help but be compelled towards her. He knows that she's winning and that she is commanding over him. And she is aware of this too. There's one room that ain't mine yet, but it's gonna be tonight. So she says, here. She's talking about Ma's room. And she's talking about being possessive. And again, we're supposed to, I think, be uncertain about whether she is being manipulative here or whether she is being authentic. But of course, in the end, the authentic connection between the two is what ultimately triumphs. And then she says, won't you come courting me in the best parlour, Mr. Cabot? So she ends up conflating him with her language here, with a frame, in Ma's room. And I think that ultimately constructs that Oedipal dynamic, which she is in control of. You know, she conflates him with his father, which inspires that sense of Oedipal rivalry. And then that is what ultimately gives her control over him. And Aben stares at her horribly confused. He's compelled by his materialism here, but also his vital connection to his mother. And he is still thinking of her as a rival. It hasn't been opened since Ma died and was laid out there, don't you? But her eyes are fixed on his so burningly that his will seems to wither before her as he stands swaying towards her helplessly. You know, her maternal command controls him here. He is at the mercy of her maternal feminine connection with Ma. He cannot do anything about it. And this seems like a type of witchcraft at this moment in time. She's holding his eyes and putting all her will into her words as she backs out the door. I expect you before long. And this is sort of terrifying, almost supernatural hypnosis that she inflicts on him here. In the end, wins. And so at the bottom, he asks, in the parlour. This seems to arouse a connotations, for he comes back and puts on his white shirt collar, half ties the tie mechanically, puts on coat, takes his hat, stands barefooted looking about him. So this constructs this sense of a ceremonial observance, which I think is completely in contrast to the way that Abby is described at the beginning of the scene, with wearing her Sunday best. You know, in the previous scene, that ceremonial observance does nothing for their Dionysian compulsion, but this one does. This one, Aben, is at the right kind of church. It's not an Apollonian, rigid, puritanical one. It is the church of his maternal connection, of paying reverence to Ma. And so there is that reconciliation, I think, being suggested at this moment in time. In bewilderment, he mutters wonderingly, Ma, what are you? And so here, he's completely astounded by this mixture of sexual compulsion and reverence. He loses control over himself because here, Abby manages to reconcile a sense of religious Apollonian observance and ceremony with the Oedipal sexual compulsion that he experiences towards her and the maternal more generally.